At 4:18 p.m. local time in the southern Caribbean, 6 gray shapes appeared on the horizon almost at once. There had been no warning, no radio traffic, and no civilian vessels anywhere nearby. On the radar of a U.S. Navy ship, the contacts emerged nearly simultaneously. 6 surface vessels were moving in quickly, tightening their pattern with every passing second. Their AIS was off. Their intentions were unclear. Their courses were converging. That was no accident. 6 naval vessels do not just wander into formation on their own. The sea itself looked calm, almost misleadingly so. Long swells moved beneath the hull as though nothing unusual was happening. But inside the ship, years of training had already kicked in. The distances were shrinking, the wakes were lengthening, and the margin for error was disappearing fast. Out here, one bad turn could lead to a collision. One wrong judgment could turn pressure into something far more serious. And once that threshold is crossed at sea, there is no easy way back. Inside the Combat Information Center, radar operators leaned closer to their screens. Only moments earlier, the display had been clean. Now it was filling fast. New surface contacts, one watchstander reported in a calm, professional tone. Multiple returns bearing 280. One contact became 2, 2 became 4, then 6. 6 surface vessels, no AIS. No reply to bridge-to-bridge calls, no commercial traffic pattern. They were not spread out at random either. The geometry told a different story. At first they were wide apart, nearly 30 nautical miles away, but their headings were slowly and deliberately pulling inward. This was not fishing traffic. This was not coincidence. The U.S. Navy ship stayed on course. Speed unchanged, heading steady, everything exactly as procedure demanded. On the bridge, binoculars came up. Dark forms began to sharpen on the horizon. Gray hulls, low profiles, military silhouettes. The identification came back from CIC. 6 Venezuelan warships. Their closing speed was rising. At that distance, there was still time. Time to communicate. Time to clarify intentions. That is how professional naval forces prevent dangerous misunderstandings at sea. The first call went out over open frequencies. Unidentified Venezuelan naval vessels. This is a United States Navy warship operating in international waters. State your intentions. Nothing. A second call followed, this time in Spanish. Still nothing. Inside CIC, the atmosphere remained controlled but fully focused. Every bearing change was logged. Every increase in speed was time-stamped. Cameras turned automatically, tracking the approaching ships. Electronic warfare systems started recording background emissions, quietly building a picture of what the other side was doing. Then all 6 contacts accelerated. Their speed jumped from the mid-teens to more than 20 knots within minutes. Their wake stretched white behind them across the deep blue water. The formation tightened. They were no longer just distant marks on a radar display. They were now a coordinated group moving with purpose. Closest point of approach calculations updated in real time. 8 nautical miles. 6. 5. At those distances, mistakes matter. A delayed response, a wrong helm order, a misread signal. Naval history is full of incidents that began exactly this way. Not with missiles or gunfire, but with steel hulls closing too quickly in open water. On the American ship, nobody raised their voice, nobody rushed. This was exactly what the training was for. Rules of engagement were reviewed in silence. Warn, record, show presence. Do not escalate unless there is no choice. The ship stayed on course. Another radio call went out. This is a United States Navy warship. You are maneuvering in an unsafe manner. Alter course immediately. Again, no reply. By now, long-range optics could pick out details on the Venezuelan ships. Crew movement, rotating antennas, bow guns uncovered though not manned. Enough to signal seriousness, but not enough to cross a clear line. The distance kept dropping, 4 nautical miles, 6 warships, 1 U.S. Navy ship, open ocean, no territorial boundary to hide behind, no uncertainty about where this was happening. This was calculated pressure, coordinated and deliberate. Inside CIC, one watch officer summed it up quietly. They're testing us. The issue was never whether the U.S. ship could protect itself. It had been built for far worse. The real question was how far the Venezuelan side intended to push, and whether they understood what happens when pressure meets discipline at sea. Because in modern naval encounters, the first side to lose control does not just lose the argument, it loses the moment, and that moment was approaching quickly. By 4:23 p.m., the geometry tightened again. What had begun as 6 separate contacts had become a coordinated approach. 2 Venezuelan ships edged slightly ahead, widening their lateral spacing. The other 4 shifted behind them, creating a shallow arc, a pattern designed to compress space without openly crossing a line. It was subtle, and it was intentional. Inside CIC, the navigation plot updated in real time. Closest point of approach, 3.8 nautical miles. Time to CPA, 7 minutes. At that range, international law still mattered. But so did physics. Steel does not negotiate. Momentum does not wait for diplomacy. The U.S. ship remained steady. No evasive turn, no increase in speed. That decision was deliberate. Changing course too early could be seen as weakness. Changing course too late could look reckless. So the ship did what it had been trained to do. Remain predictable, remain professional, and document everything. The bridge-to-bridge calls continued. This is a United States Navy warship operating in international waters. Your current maneuvers are unsafe. No response. Through long-range optics, the Venezuelan vessels were now unmistakable. Gray hulls low in the water, weathered paint, older designs but still armed. Forward-mounted guns visible on the bows, antennas sweeping steadily through the electromagnetic spectrum. Inside CIC, the electronic warfare team reported a change. New emissions detected. Low-power surface search radar. Not fire control radar. Not yet, but active scanning. That mattered. Passive observation is one thing. Actively painting another ship is something else. It signals intent to track, to measure, to apply pressure with precision rather than noise. Everything was logged. Timestamps, frequencies, bearings, the kind of information that rarely makes headlines, but matters later. On deck, sailors could now clearly see the wakes, 6 white paths cutting toward them. The Venezuelan ships were not charging at maximum speed. That was never the point. They were closing just fast enough to force a decision. 3 nautical miles. At that distance, the margin for error disappears quickly. One unexpected move by either side could trigger collision avoidance action. And once that happens, the narrative changes. The side that maneuvers first is often portrayed as the side that flinched. The captain reviewed the posture once more. Rules of engagement unchanged. No weapons manned, no radar shifted into fire control mode, no threats beyond repeated safety warnings. But presence matters. A quiet order went out. Prepare flight operations. Below deck, the Seahawk helicopter crew moved with practiced efficiency. Helmets on, checklists moving, no urgency, no hesitation. In that moment, the helicopter was not there as a weapon. It was a sensor platform, a camera, a message. At 4:26 p.m., its rotor blades came alive. The helicopter lifted cleanly off the deck and banked low over the water. Not a flyby, not a stunt, just a controlled move into the space between the ships. Every eye on both sides followed it. From the air, the picture became sharper. The Seahawk's sensors locked onto hull numbers, deck layouts, crew positions. High-resolution imagery streamed back to the ship in real time. This was not intimidation. This was evidence collection. The Venezuelan vessels maintained course, but their formation tightened again. 2 of them edged closer to the helicopter's orbit, not overtly threatening, but close enough to send a message. Inside CIC, another update came in. CPA now below 3 nautical miles. That number matters. It is the point where encounters stop being described as routine interaction and start being described as dangerous. The helicopter adjusted slightly, maintaining its orbit. No abrupt movement, no aggressive angle, just visible, steady presence. Then came the light. A brief green laser pulse, non-lethal and precise, washed across the bridge windows of the lead Venezuelan vessel. Impossible to miss, impossible to misunderstand. The radio transmission followed. Venezuelan naval vessels, you are operating unsafely in international waters. Your actions are being recorded. This time, something changed. Movement on the Venezuelan bridge, one wake shortened slightly. Another ship hesitated, its bow drifting just a few degrees off the intercept line. Small changes, but meaningful ones. Because at sea, hesitation is often the first sign that pressure is no longer working the way it was intended. With 6 warships now less than 3 nautical miles away, the encounter had reached its most dangerous stage. Not because of weapons, but because of distance. The next few minutes would decide whether this remained a tense standoff or turned into something far worse. By 4:28 p.m., the standoff was at its narrowest. On radar, the 6 Venezuelan ships hovered just outside the most dangerous threshold. Close enough to apply pressure, close enough to demand a reaction, but not yet close enough to justify escalation. It was a calculated balance, and both sides understood it. Inside CIC, the air felt heavier, not with fear, but with concentration. Every console glowed. Every watchstander was tracking a different variable. Speed, bearing drift, radar emissions, optical feeds from the helicopter overhead. Nothing was left to instinct. Everything was procedure. The U.S. Navy ship did not alter course. That mattered more than any radio call. Turning now would have reduced immediate risk, but it also would have handed over control of the situation. In close encounters, predictability is power. The ship's steady movement through the water sent a clear message. We are not reacting because we do not need to. The Seahawk continued its low orbit just under 300 feet above the water. From that angle, its sensors captured details impossible to see from the ship itself. Engine heat signatures above normal cruising load. Crew movement near gun positions. Small course corrections too subtle to stand out on radar. This was not intimidation. This was documentation. On the Venezuelan ships, crew members were now clearly visible. Helmets on, life vests secured, some watching the helicopter, others watching the American destroyer through binoculars. No weapons manned, but readiness was obvious. At 4:30 p.m., a new signal flickered across the spectrum. Intermittent targeting radar, the electronic warfare officer reported. Low power, not fire control. That difference was critical. Fire control radar would have crossed a clear red line. It would have triggered immediate defensive action. But this was still probing, still measuring, still testing reactions without fully committing. The U.S. ship did not mirror the move. It simply recorded everything: frequency, pulse width, bearing, duration. Because in modern naval confrontations, data lasts longer than posturing. The helicopter tightened its orbit slightly, lining its cameras up with the lead Venezuelan ship. The green laser pulsed once more, brief and precise, touching the bridge wing before switching off. Another radio message followed, calm and unmistakable. You are approaching a United States Navy warship at unsafe distance. Alter course immediately. This time the answer came not over the radio, but on the water. One Venezuelan ship reduced speed, only slightly, but enough to shorten its wake. Another altered heading by a few degrees, breaking the symmetry of the group. The arc that had been compressing the space between them showed its first crack. Inside CIC, the plot updated again. CPA stabilized. Then it increased slightly. That was the moment everyone noticed. Not because the danger was gone, but because the momentum had shifted. The U.S. ship had not threatened. It had not chased. It had not fired. It had not even visibly trained a weapon. And yet the formation in front of it was starting to come apart. That is what restraint looks like when it is backed by capability. At 4:33 p.m., the helicopter reported more changes. Multiple vessels reducing speed, formation loosening. The Venezuelan ships were no longer moving as a single coordinated unit. Small gaps opened between them. The precise geometry of the approach softened into something less certain, less unified. Then, finally, the radio crackled. United States naval vessel, a measured voice said. We are conducting routine patrol operations in proximity to Venezuelan waters. It was not an apology. It was not an admission, but it was communication. The reply from the U.S. ship came immediately. This is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your unsafe maneuvers have been recorded. No debate, no escalation, just a fact. The helicopter widened its orbit, maintaining visual contact without pushing closer. The laser remained off. The point had already been made. By 4:36 p.m., the distance between the ships was increasing, slowly at first, then clearly. 6 warships that had moved in together were now spreading apart, their bows no longer aligned on a common intercept course. The moment had passed, not with noise, not with force, with discipline. Because at sea, the side that holds its line the longest does more than avoid confrontation. It shapes the way the confrontation ends. By 4:37 p.m., the shift was undeniable. On the surface, things still looked tense. The 6 Venezuelan ships were still visible. Their hulls were still angled in the general direction of the U.S. warship. Their antennas were still turning. Their crews were still topside. But the radar picture had already changed. The lead Venezuelan ship reduced speed again, this time decisively. Its wake shortened by nearly a third. Seconds later, another followed. Not enough to look like a retreat, but enough to break the rhythm. Inside the Combat Information Center, the navigation plot told the real story. CPA increasing, time to CPA extending. Relative motion no longer converging. The 6-ship arc that had compressed space just minutes earlier was now stretching outward. That mattered. Coordinated pressure only works as long as coordination remains intact. The Seahawk held position on the formation's flank. Steady, visible, unmistakable. No aggressive runs, no abrupt moves, just constant presence, recorded and undeniable. From the helicopter's sensors, the changes were even clearer. Engine heat signatures dropped as throttles came back. Deck crews moved away from forward positions. One vessel made a slow 5-degree turn to starboard, small in appearance but significant in meaning. This was not confusion. It was calculation. At 4:39 p.m., the Venezuelan radio transmitted again. United States naval vessel, we request you adjust your course to avoid misunderstanding. It was careful wording, neutral, diplomatic, and most importantly, it acknowledged the risk. The response from the American ship was short and final. This is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful transit in international waters. We will maintain course. No threat, no counter-demand, just fact. The silence that followed lasted longer. Then, on the water, the effect became visible. The Venezuelan ships began to separate. Not sharply, no sudden turns, no high-speed withdrawal, just controlled divergence. One ship fell back by a stern length, another eased outward to port. The tight formation dissolved into loose spacing. At 4:41 p.m., the closest Venezuelan vessel crossed a threshold every navigator understands. 5 nautical miles. That matters. It is the point where an encounter stops being classified as a dangerous close approach and becomes observation again. Inside CIC, the posture shifted quietly. No one relaxed completely. No one celebrated. Professionalism does not surge with relief. It simply returns to routine. The helicopter widened its orbit, then climbed slightly, giving the Venezuelan ships more room while keeping them in view. Its job was never to chase. Its job was to confirm, and the confirmation was clear. The pressure phase was over. The Venezuelan formation continued to loosen. Each ship was now maneuvering independently. Their bows were no longer pointed toward the U.S. vessel. Their wakes angled outward instead of inward. At 4:44 p.m., the electronic warfare team reported another shift. Emissions decreasing. Radar activity dropped back to passive levels. No more probing sweeps. No more intermittent targeting signals. The message was complete. This was not a display of dominance through force. It was something quieter and arguably more effective. The U.S. Navy ship had not fired. It had not trained a gun. It had not altered its course. And yet 6 warships that had approached quickly were now peeling away one by one, without a single shouted order crossing the water. By 4:47 p.m., the distance had grown to 8 nautical miles. The Seahawk turned back toward the ship and settled onto the flight deck. Its rotors spun down, sensors shut off. The data was already archived. Every maneuver, every emission, every second. What had just happened would never look dramatic in a headline. No explosions, no warning shots, no fiery clash. But in naval terms, it was decisive. Because the encounter did not end when the ships separated. It ended when one side realized that pushing further would cost more than it could gain. And that realization had now settled in, quietly and completely. By 4:50 p.m., the sea had returned to something close to normal. The 6 Venezuelan warships were still visible on the horizon, but no longer relevant to the immediate situation. Their courses diverged, their speeds stabilized, their formation dissolved into routine patrol spacing. Whatever message they had intended to send had already been sent and answered. On the U.S. ship, operations returned to standard watch. No announcements, no congratulations, no visible sense of triumph. Because this had never been about winning in the moment. It was about controlling what came after. Every second of the encounter had been recorded. Radar tracks, optical footage, electronic emissions, radio transcripts, course changes down to the degree, speed changes down to the knot. This was not theater. It was a record. And records matter. From a strategic point of view, the Venezuelan move was understandable. They could not directly challenge the U.S. ship in a conventional sense, and they did not need to. The goal was pressure. Close distance, coordinated maneuvering, just enough risk to generate attention or force a reaction. What they were really testing was not firepower, it was discipline. The U.S. response followed a doctrine shaped over decades of similar encounters in some of the world's most contested waters. Do not escalate first. Do not react emotionally. Do not give away the narrative. Hold course. Show presence. Record everything. And it worked. Because once the encounter ended, the imbalance became clear. Venezuela gained a brief moment of visibility. The United States gained something more valuable: insight. How quickly the ships coordinated. Which vessel functioned as the de facto lead. How emissions changed under pressure. At what distance hesitation appeared. Those details do not disappear when ships part ways. They are studied, compared, filed, and used later. That is the part most people never see. Naval power is not only about missiles, hull numbers, or tonnage. It is also about understanding behavior, especially under stress. And in that sense, this encounter revealed more about one side than the other. The U.S. ship never needed to prove what it could do. Its capability was already understood. Its restraint was intentional. Because restraint, when backed by overwhelming capacity, is not weakness. It is leverage. By choosing not to escalate, the ship denied the Venezuelan Navy the outcome it likely wanted most, a reaction that could be framed as provocation. Instead, the encounter ended with quiet separation and a detailed body of evidence showing who closed the distance, who ignored repeated hails, and who eventually pulled back. That matters politically, it matters legally, and it matters strategically. As the ship continued its transit, the Caribbean returned to open water and long swells. Another day without shots fired. Another tense encounter resolved without further incident. But none of it was accidental. 6 warships moved in fast. 1 ship held its line. The situation ended without escalation. Not because of luck, not because of hesitation, but because discipline, clarity, and professionalism left no room for miscalculation. So the real question is not what happened that afternoon. The real question is what happens next. Should navies answer pressure tactics like these with a harder response? Or is controlled restraint still the most effective tool at sea? Because in modern naval competition, the loudest move is not always the strongest one. Sometimes the side that says the least and records the most is the one that leaves with the advantage.